Unit 7 has explored post-war Latin America. Latin American corporatism. The Great Depression had wreaked havoc on Latin America's export economies, convincing workers and elites that change was necessary. In Argentina, Juan Perón rode to power on a wave of popular discontent, articulating a new populist discourse and promising to expand the state in order to modernize the economy and to take care of the downtrodden. Perón's formula for state regeneration was widely copied throughout Latin America, as various states tried to promote industry and sponsored various forms of social insurance. Import substitution industrialization. Raúl Prebisch argued that Latin America was locked in a permanent state of dependency, supplying raw materials to Western markets in return for higher margin, value-added goods. To correct this imbalance, Prebisch proposed tariffs and other trade barriers to create the conditions for industrialization inside Latin America that would complete the region's modernization and elevate regional living standards. Rise of the junta. By the mid-1960s, it was becoming clear that despite high levels of GDP growth, Latin America's prosperity was not trickling down to the lower orders. This stimulated left-wing reform movements to demand land redistribution, higher wages, and other reforms. Latin American elites, rather than negotiate, mostly conspired with the military to take over civilian government and crushed left-wing dissidents. The violence employed by Latin American juntas was not gratuitous, but consciously designed and carefully targeted to destroy the regime's opponents and terrorize potential sympathizers. The juntas employed state terrorism to effectively silence the left, and many of the junta could count on Western support despite flagrant human rights violations. Latin America's history has long intersected with U.S. interests. But during the Cold War, U.S. interference in the region's political development was pervasive and persistent. Starting with the removal of Jacobo Arbenz in Guatemala, the U.S. embarked upon a campaign to remove democratically elected socialists, either through clandestine operations or by sending in the Marines, while supporting right-wing dictatorships engaged in dirty wars with their own people. After Mexico defaulted on their foreign debt in 1982, it inaugurated a region-wide debt crisis that sparked protests, the fall of the juntas, and intervention by the International Monetary Fund. By 1999, most of Latin America had returned to civilian government, and many left-of-center regimes abandoned dependency theory and embraced the emerging World Trade Organization, liberal economics, and the global capitalist system as the best path towards prosperity. The 1990s inaugurated a period of economic growth as Latin Americans slowly put the lost decade and the scars of military government behind them. Inequality increased in Latin America after the IMF imposed austerity measures. But regional poverty also diminished in the first decade of the 21st century. Conditions are clearly better than in the 1980s, but there are serious questions about whether the World Trade Organization inspired growth concentrated mostly upon resource extraction industries, is socially and ecologically sustainable.